Yes, this is Ishita again. I'll be serving as the moderator for the panel discussion. And as I said at the outset, first, I would like to receive some questions concerning the talks that we have heard. So we might take several questions for the speakers. So any questions from the floor, first of all, to the speakers? If you have any questions, please raise your hand. We have a person with a microphone to bring you the microphone. So if there are any questions. Okay, then, the person over there. Yes, I'm from Waseda University. My name is Hasegawa. I come from Tokyo, and thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity to hear your talks. And I was really impressed by each and every one of you. So Jake talked about the SUNY case in the last part of his presentation. So you have an institutional repository, but other than that, you talked about Dryad, a third-party repository. So in Japan, for data, institutional repositories are being used at universities. So, but there may be some limitations to that, and also the research data. Maybe it's better to utilize these third-party repositories. So, if there are ways to distinguish whether to keep the data in the institutional repository versus a third-party repository, if you can give some advice about which is better in which kind of cases. It seems that he didn't have the receiver for simultaneous interpretation, so please wait a while. So then I'd like to.
Sorry. Thank you for your presentations, and I'm so deeply impressed and mood about your presentation. And my question is about SUNY and the Dryad. And in Japan, we use this normally we use this institutional repository as a repository for articles, also repositories for research data. And is there any recommendation for the if research data it is recommended to use third-party repository or institutional repository? If there are some recommendations, please tell me about that. Thank you.
Can everybody hear me? Okay. Sure. I think to further go into the context at the University at Buffalo, in contrast to the University of Michigan, we decided that Michigan to build our own institutional data repository because we saw an advantage of really providing a direct service to researchers, and we had the resources to do it. At the University at Buffalo, we just don't have the resources, not just to build the repository, but also to staff it and to keep it going. It's a large expense to make happen. And so we decided to sign up for membership in Dryad as a means to offer a high quality service and to conserve our resources to apply to other things. So I will comment that our experience with Dryad has been good. We've been very happy with the service that we've received. The challenge with a third-party service that's outside of your institution is that you're not necessarily the ones to be able to control that service, right? So if they're particular functionalities that you want, you have to make a request and hope that they answer that request, rather than being able to have your developer or have your people, work in creating that particular functionality in your repository. That said, I think Dryad has been at this for a while. They have very strong relationships with publishers. That's how they got started as an outgrowth of ecological science publishers. They needed a place, the ecology researchers needed a place to put their data. They didn't quite have a disciplinary repository. So Dryad was developed as a means to connect the data associated with articles from that particular field together. They since expanded to go beyond the ecological field to handle data sets from all different disciplines. So they are, much in the same way that an institutional repository is, handling all different kinds of data sets. The thing that I really appreciate about Dryad is they offer data curation services much in the way that we did at the University of Michigan. And again, I think the point that was made about curation sort of having different meanings to different people is a very good one. For librarians, it really is, how do we try to ensure that the data going out are the best they can possibly be, given what good practices are for data more broadly. And Dryad provides those kinds of services as a part of our membership. And so it's not just putting a data set out there and hoping that it's good, it's having another set of eyes with some expertise in good data management practices, good data sharing practices, that are there to review the data before it goes out. There are other types of third-party repositories out there. There is a program called Figshare. They are attached, I believe this is true, I haven't looked at it recently. They are attached to a publishing agency, Macmillan, and their services, at least as far as I understand them, were more expensive than what Dryad was able to offer us. So, I mean, I think it's worth checking out to see other third-party services and what might be right for you. But for us, after doing that research, and again, this is before I got here, so I'm talking a little bit out of turn because I wasn't involved in the actual process. Dryad made sense for us. I should also disclose that I am on the Dryad board of directors. So I work with Dryad fairly closely in terms of helping them guide their services and where they're trying to go. So my thoughts and opinions, comes from that particular bias. So I mean, I think it's worth doing investigation to see what it is that you want out of a repository and what it is that they offer and at what particular cost. So for us, Dryad has been a good investment, but depending upon what your researchers need and what you're able to offer, it's worth doing investigation to make sure that it works for you.
Thank you very much. And there is a question coming in online. So let me read it out. And this is a question to Jake. So data curation, I believe, is something done before the data is actually disclosed. But after it is disclosed, would data curation be done again? Depending on the development of the discipline, I believe that the needs for data curation may change. So if data curation is done to an already disclosed and published data, how frequently would it be done and at what timing would it be done?
Okay, I think the question was also for me. And the question was about the timing and the frequency of data curation. So I would say, ideally, data curation should be done throughout the research data lifecycle. We should always have some individuals or somebody looking at the quality of the data, the suitability of the data for purpose, with an eye towards the data's eventual release to the public, right? So researchers, I think, try to really develop the data set for their own specific purpose and tend not to think about the larger implications of what would somebody else be able to do with the data? How would they be able to connect with it and understand it and use it for their particular purposes? And that makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, the research being done usually is provided by a particular grant that is trying to answer a particular question. So it makes sense that that would be the focus. But ideally, we would have somebody on the team who could ask questions along the way and to make suggestions with an eye towards how would somebody outside of this group be able to connect with that data set. I think the service that we provide as librarians is sort of that final check, right? We're in one of my colleagues used to say that we are the first users of that data set. And so our role as best we can is to try to understand how that data set could be used. And again, recognizing that we are not experts in the particular field of study, but we're the ones who sort of first get into it and try to make sense of it and try to project how it might be used by somebody else. So is there a need for library-based data curation if that data curation is provided by the research team? I would still argue, yes, that there is a role for librarians in reviewing that data set before it is published as a last check to offer a different perspective on one that has expertise of how research is done, but not necessarily this particular area of research. Thinking about how others outside of that area of research might understand and connect with it, because a data set could be published with the eye that, well, it will be used by this group of people, but in fact, this group of people might find value or a reason to pull it into their own research. So you never really know who might find that data set to be of value. And I think it's helpful to have a generalist, somebody with a good sense of what a data set might need to be connected and meaningful to a large group of people. It's still helpful to have that, even if that data set has been curated by somebody on the team with a more depth of knowledge and experience than we might have as librarians.
Thank you so much. Are there other questions? Well, of course, you will have the opportunity to ask questions during the panel discussion. So if you have additional questions, you're free to ask questions anytime during the panel discussion. So not an individual presentation we heard, we might want to take questions, overall questions as well. So Professor Takeuchi, Professor Tomiura both raised questions for us to deal with in this panel discussion. So I'd like to invite first Professor Takeuchi, what Professor Takeuchi said. Jake, Robin, Simon, three of you, do you have any comments to the presentation made by Professor Takeuchi? Just briefly, maybe just brief comments from the three overseas speakers. Who would like to start?
Okay. So first of all, I'd like to pick up where Jake left off about your data curation point. I totally agree. That's even, I think that's even true within our team about different meanings of data curation, and this will be a useful point for me to take back. But I think for us, what we're doing, what our librarians are doing when data comes into the repository is really what I tend to call it is quality assurance rather than curation. It's quality assurance of the submission when it's deposited. And an advantage of that checkpoint is the way the repository workflow goes. Somebody submits a deposit and the librarians can accept it or reject it. We use that reject button very, we use it a lot, but we use it very carefully. It's a chance to negotiate with the person depositing to say, can you give us a little more metadata? I see you've done this. Do you have a file that explains the variables? can you give us a README file that explains what these different files are about? Can you add some more, can you add some geographic tags because we see this research was done in a certain place? Can you add some subject keywords? And it is a negotiation because the researcher may be in a hurry. They may have different amounts of patience. If it's a student depositing for the first time, it could be very instructive for them. They're actually quite grateful to get these questions and do a better job with the submission. A senior researcher who has in a hurry to publish their paper, they may not be patient. But I think our staff is very good at negotiating that, because kind of similar to the previous question, when is the right time to curate? For us, we only have that bit of power with the researcher because once we press the button to accept, we give them a DOI, a permanent identifier. And once they have that DOI and they go back to their publisher and say, here's my DOI that goes with my paper, we don't have any power over that again after that. So it's really quality assurance to the extent we're able to look at the data and understand it and ask questions of it. But largely, it's the kind of metadata fields that help with discovery rather than the deep curation that you're talking about in the right column, organizing the data. And I think that's either better done in a disciplinary repository, like sometimes if we get genomic data, we may question and say, don't you have a database in your field that this should be deposited in rather than a general repository? Because they will curate it and fit it into the bigger scientific project that it fits. Another thing, just to add to that briefly, in terms of the deeper curation, we're starting to see movement in Europe for data stewards, and there's still data, and we're still asking questions. What is the role of a data steward? What is the role of a data manager? But we think that especially maybe data managers, for a large project, they may hire a data manager or assign a certain percentage of somebody's role, like a postdoc, to do data curation. And if it's a smaller project, it might be just 5% of someone's role. But we are encouraging people to put these costs into their grant proposals. It touches on how to do the other question about maintaining systems over time. We try and get cost recovery from the grant proposal to do, and that we would see that as the deeper curation rather than from the library.
So I think to go back to the question on reacting to the questions that are listed here, the first question being, to what extent do faculty and staff members of departments, excluding those who are involved in formulating the departmental implementation guidelines, understand the policy and implementation guidelines, and how should they be made aware of them? I think that's a great question, because faculty don't read policy. I think we're all aware of that, right? I think policy, they don't have time, first and foremost, and policy can be annoying, frankly, to them, because it may sort of stop them from doing what they want to do, or take them in a direction that they don't necessarily want to go in. But at the same time, they really do need to be aware of the policy and the larger expectations, but even more than that, the support that's available for them. I think there's a general need for awareness more broadly. And I think what Robin's alluding to is can we sort of bake that policy in, or the policy aspects in different parts of the research workflows, the research enterprise of the university, right? So there is encouragement for researchers to add money to cover the costs of managing and sharing data in grants. I think, while I don't think that's been terribly successful at the moment, because that's not extra money, it's money that comes out of the grant, and researchers are reluctant to put anything in because it takes away from the quote unquote research aspects of what they do. It's still an opportunity to educate them that not only is there some money potentially available if they ask for it, but here's why they might want to ask for it, and here's the importance of recognizing what you're going to be expected to do from the funding agency via the university, because the university is ultimately responsible for ensuring that the researcher carries out what they've signed on to do. So it's looking for opportunities to catch them at moments where they are directly impacted or could directly benefit from the work that we do and the services that we provide, and understand the larger policy context in which that takes place. That said, it's not necessarily easy to do, because different researchers are doing different things at different times for different reasons. But I think it's really important for us to think about, are there opportunities or sort of shared points of engagement that we could really identify to encourage and raise awareness of what the environment in which they're going to be needing to work in, and the kinds of activities they're going to need to do, and to recognize that there is support for them in helping them through that process.
Just to pick up on what Jake was saying there, I think this is where the kind of central role of advocacy and awareness raising comes in, and this is one of the most important parts. Not to take away from all the hard technical work that goes on in the background, but one of the most important parts of this whole process is making sure that the researchers understand what these policies are, what we're trying to do, how we're trying to support them. So when it comes to things like providing information about policies, it's very important to choose the way you deliver that message. So for me, I have found the best approach is to talk to researchers about the policy, which, yes, as Jake says, they don't want to know about. They don't want to hear about the policy. But they need to know that it exists. They need to know the requirements. What gets that message across better is to say, here is the policy, here are the requirements, and here is how we will support you to meet those requirements. And this is the driver. It's like, yeah, you need to know the requirements, but this is what I'm going to do today to help you do that, to meet those requirements. And that's really my job, is to get to give it that little bit of extra motivation, so that so that they'll accept it. And I think this actually covers a number of different issues. It goes to this question of data curation. It goes to your question about data repositories. It's about speaking to the researchers where they are coming from. So not speaking to them about what we want to know or where we stand. We need to be where the researcher is. We need to go to them and understand their position. So this question about data repositories, there are lots of advantages of having an internal repository, lots of advantages of going outside, but you have to understand, how does the researcher feel about this? And I know a number of researchers who, if you start talking about external repositories, even big generalist repositories like Zenodo, which is backed by CERN, it's fine, it's a perfectly secure repository, it's a great repository, but it's outside the university, and a lot of researchers will back off from them because they think, well, my data is now owned in some sense by an external organization. Well, that's okay, because we have a repository in-house. You can use ours. And they feel like, well, this is where I work. These are the people who support me. I know I can trust them. I know where my data is. And that's an important part of that thought, that process of decision-making. The same with this question around data curation. You know, you have to understand what the researcher means. That's not necessarily what we mean by data curation. But if you understand what they mean, if you understand what they want to achieve, then you are much better placed to find the points where your support can fit in with them, rather than trying to take a definition or a version of, well, this is what data curation means in RDM terms. We go, well, what does data curation mean to you, and how do we support that? And then we can do our part alongside of that. So it's for me, all of these questions do come back to, how do you communicate this to your researchers? How do you get them to listen to you? How do you get them to engage with what you want them to do, while making them feel like they're the ones that are deciding to do it completely of their own free will? But it's that persuasion.
Thank you very much. I think I heard a very important message from you. from you all. Professor Takeuchi and Professor Tomiura, after the great advices from the three experts, and also for the audience, if you have any messages in response, I would appreciate your feedback and comments. I agree to Jake's response because I'm a researcher. If I wasn't part of this policy making, should I go organically to the policy by myself? I think I don't have the time for it. I know that will be my answer. But it's also true that there are different touch points or timings. When I'm applying for research grant, and I'm making the planning, I would seek for advice. There is communication there. And in that conversation at that timing, if I had a chance to learn about some great advice or some support, how to make it more easier. I'm sorry, it was not Jake's response. It was you, Simon. I'm sorry. I'm responding to your comment. I remember, yeah, Mr. Smith. I would rather say, okay. So at those right timing, if I receive the right advice, if the researchers do, the researchers will understand the benefit. So catching the right moment is important. And if that is successful, it won't be just about each individual, the group, the faculty or the department. If we can conduct the communication effectively to them, to the group, I think it will help us a lot to do our job. So how do you send a message out to a group effectively? What are the right timings? Because if it's individual one-to-one, it's more easier. When they come with an inquiry, that's the timing to respond and give them the chance to understand the advantage. And that is also the chance to share the policy and have them understand more effectively or productively. If we can disseminate the message to a more number of people, do you have any advice? Is that a question to Simon or to all of the experts here?
That's well. The first thing, if I could just say, the first thing is if we had more researchers like you who would come and ask for advice, we would have much less work to do, because a huge amount of our job is going out and persuading them to come and ask for advice, persuading the researchers that they need advice. So please keep doing that and tell everyone else, go and ask for advice if you don't know the answer. We have information for you. In terms of the timing, yes, the individual contact is incredibly useful. One contact can create a whole network of contacts within a school or within a faculty. That's happened to me personally since coming to Edinburgh. One particular researcher came to me for help, and within a few weeks she had connected me to a number of her colleagues and a number of research groups, ethics committees, and I was very, very busy for that first year talking to them. So that one-to-one contact can be incredibly valuable. But really, it's about, from my perspective, it's been about finding the research groups, finding the contact person, and then just keep asking, can I come to your research group? Can I come to your research group? Can I come to your research group? Until they say, yes, okay, come, stop talking now and come. And it is also about finding those other areas like the ethics committees and finding other contact points, but it's just, you have to knock on the door and keep knocking until they let you in, and then you can talk about the policy, talk about the support, talk about the advice and the tools that we have to help them. And then hopefully they will let you back in next year to talk to their students. Fingers crossed, hope.
pass it on. So I think librarians are probably familiar with this problem of, as you put it, catching the right moment. We talk about talking to researchers at their moment of need, because you can tell them things. For example, that we just had inductions in September, new students, new staff coming to the university. They're getting tons of handouts. They're getting talk after talk about how to do this and how to do that, and they're overwhelmed with starting their program, and they won't learn then. So it is partly, yeah, Simon builds relationships with different departments, and then we discover actually February, or the second year students, that's the right time to come. I just wanted to add another trick we have. All we do is trick researchers. So we do. Another trick we have is we have an annual internal conference. We invite researchers to submit papers, contributions, because a call for contributions, because now it used to be called Dealing with Data, and now we have an open science conference. We get researchers to come talk about their research and how they're doing open science. So in one sense, we're getting them to take on the message bearing. They're telling their peers, this is why I'm doing open science. Yeah, so they like to come, they like to give talks, and then we can do things like lightning talks or a poster session with our services. We don't take up a keynote talk talking about our services, but we sneak it in.
Yeah, I really think that Robin and Simon have made some excellent points, and I'll just try to reinforce a couple of them. Really thinking about not just in the moment when researchers need to know this because they need to advance through the process, but thinking about how do we lay the groundwork and plant the seeds, and teaching graduate students, I think, is a key element, because they're still very much in the process of forming their professional identity. Right, they're becoming a chemist or they're becoming a sociologist, and if we can get them to think about research data management and sharing as a natural part of what they do just because they are a researcher, right? This is just a part of the research process, then I think that's really a win. So we don't have to sort of constantly remind them or constantly focus on policy and what they should do. It's already a part of their psyche almost, right? Like just natural research behavior. And the other thing I think is as we've been discussing this, what I'm really struck by for this day is all of us presenting have really formed some importance around involving all parts of the university or other stakeholders in this process. Right? We form committees about how do we develop these policies, how do we develop the structures and the workflows. And I think really a part of that is not just developing these, but communicating them out. And so it's not just our responsibility as librarians to ensure that researchers know the policy. It's also the Office of Research. It's also IT. It's also the other stakeholders in this process who hopefully are able to, when the moment strikes, because you're never sure when the moment will happen where the researchers are actually able to listen to you and hear what you're saying, the more people we have prepared to make that pitch or to raise that awareness, the more likely it is we'll actually catch people and change perceptions and change behavior.
Yes.
Sure.
Sorry, just as just Robin and Jake were talking, one thought just occurred to me. One of the most important messages I think that we can get across to the researchers is not about the policy, and it's not about our services, and it's not about the repositories. It's that we are here. That because it is really hard to catch the researchers at the right moment when they actually need us. So every time we get to contact them, every contact we have, every awareness session or every research group, it's about saying, if you forget everything else, just remember when you hit a question about your data or your data management or long-term preservation, come and find us. We're on the website. We have our information. We will do what we can. It doesn't matter whether you think you've gone way past the point. There is no point when it's too late to talk to us. Just come and find us. And that's one of the key things. And it works for the researchers. I find it works for the researchers because it makes them feel like we're not badgering them. We're not kind of constantly going at them and saying, come now. they can come to us whenever they need us, and that's a hugely important thing for them.
Thank you very much. I think as a service provider, that's the attitude that is needed, I believe. So Professor Takeuchi, do you have anything to add? Yes, thank you very much. This is not a question, but rather a comment. But the last point that Simon made, and also what you said earlier, I believe that those are very important, and I also totally agree. For the researchers, the service providers, telling them that this is how data management is done or data is to be published. I believe we shouldn't force them our ways of doing it, because as we create these systems and as we provide services, we tend to try to work top down because the government is saying this, therefore the researchers should do this. But if we say it that way, it doesn't match the researchers' needs or what they want to do. So how do we balance this? As Simon said at the end, I think that's really important, because the researchers, what is that they want to happen? That perspective is necessary for us. And another thing, if I may add, and if I may boast a little bit, as Jake said, it's important to educate the grad students. Well, actually, starting last year, we have a class for grad students about data management. Actually, we only have a few students, but this year we have a little more students. So if this spreads out, I think it will create that attitude. And also we have the library people also coming in to help us. So I just boasted about the program that we have in place. Well, thank you very much. So now, any questions from the floor or from people online? I believe you have a lot of questions that you want to ask. We have a lot of experienced people on stage from 2 institutions overseas. And I believe that this is a very precious opportunity to ask questions. So any questions? Yes, the person over there. I'm from Kyushu University. My name is Nakagawa. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And I have a question to all of you, but especially listening to the Japanese policy of data disclosure, especially is focusing on the science side. The samples are using some experimental data from experiments, and also the paper is based on those data. And then after a while, it will be disclosed. And then I don't know what happens after that. But that is given as an example, and that forms the basis of the Japanese government's policy. However, my area is about dialects in Japan, which means 10 years from now, the language being used may change. So the older the data, the more precious. Therefore, I want the data to be kept for a very long time. And of course, my research object or subject are people. It's not as if we can go there and research when and where we want. Sometimes during a survey, we find something that is totally unrelated to what we are surveying. But maybe 10 years from now, I'll be writing a paper about that. So for the humanities area, data disclosure, do you have any opinion or advice that you might be able to give us? So anybody can answer if you have any comments. Well, then, if I may start. So for the humanities area, digital humanities, I think we are discussing that a lot now, and this is a very important area. So it's not experiment data that is presented as evidence. The disclosure of data, the value is much probably higher. For example, some professors who have retired, they have the Ainu language on cassette tapes. Sometimes people come and inquire about what happened to those recorded tapes. But the media may be converted so that many people can have access to that. I believe that's something that the libraries will have to do. That's a very important role for libraries to take on going forward. Now we are just focusing too much on the government policies. We're trying to comply with that. We're trying to follow the policies of the government. But the role of libraries going forward, we have to look at a broader context, and we have to think from a broader perspective. And as you say, when we talk about data, we should not forget about the perspective that you've just presented. But still, it's very difficult to get funding for this, and that's a reality. Because government policies, government wants to spread the results of the research that's carried out here in Japan. But as an infrastructure, what is necessary? I think that's the voice that we should raise, and it's something the library alone cannot do. I believe we have to have the research community also getting involved. So that's all from myself. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to answer? If I may, it is true that if you look at the national government's policy, we're asked to collect data, make data open so that we can use data for innovation. So humanity data being accumulated and publicized is not exactly what the government is intending to do. Having said that, researchers in the humanity area are also responsible. They are not willing to publicize their research. While they are engaged in research, they will never disclose the research content. As I said, data will be publicized when professors ready to retire, there is no succeeding researchers of the topic, and then say, we have this research data in the corner of the room. So if it's digital, it could be completely lost. So while you're engaged in research, you still keep it, but when you're ready to publicize, it's often discarded or lost. So at the time of retirement, sometimes university can take that ownership over so that the research result will be kept in storage. So it could be just an opportunity, but we have to have a system to make sure it's stored. I have to look forward to a lot of effort done by Professor Ishida. Yes, that doesn't mean that I'm willing to take all that workload.
A couple of brief comments. In our university, we use the word open research instead of open science to make it clear that we're being inclusive with the humanities, and that it's not just the data management policy is not just for scientists. That's the first point. And then tying back to this question about legacy data retirement, people retiring and leaving their data with the library, a couple of points. There are, of course, different levels of preservation, and sometimes you can rescue the data, but save it and just focus on saving the bits, what you have, and do the curation later when you do have investment. Because once you can't read those old disks, then you might as well throw them away. And so our data vault system does that a bit, where it might be retained for 10 years and no curation happens on it, but at least it's doing checksums. It's making sure that the data is stored for 10 years, and that after that 10 years, maybe the researcher only had money from the grant proposal to store it for 10 years. Then at the end of that 10 years, it might get deleted if the decision gets made to delete it, but it also might get kept if it turns out it seems to be valuable. It seems people are requesting access to it. And at that point, it becomes a university data asset, and it's no longer just storing it on behalf of the researcher. The university is then taking some responsibility, and hopefully at that point, we'll be able to do some curation on it, file format migration, and other higher levels of preservation.
So I think one of the things that we need to recognize more broadly is to your point that different data sets are going to require different levels of care, of longevity, of just different types of needs, and that's going to be a challenge, I think, to figure out without an investment in disciplinary repositories, right? So as an institutional repository provider, I accept data from all across the university, but because I do that, I can't specify we treat this data set differently from that data set. And so what I'm really hoping eventually is we can do is that once disciplinary repositories go online that are targeted to a particular type of data and the particular circumstances or need for that data, that we can then transfer data out of our institutional repository and put it in that disciplinary repository where it is better served. So the institutional repository effectively functions as a safety net so that things aren't lost. To sort of to Robin's point, we may not be able to do everything we want to do with that data set now, but eventually we could curate it in a way that was more appropriate or directed to researchers in linguistics or a different field. I think the other thing that I would say is that in the United States, particularly with the National Science Foundation, their goal was to, they put out a data management plan requirement, right? All people who applied for National Science Foundation grants had to include a data management plan. But what they really wanted was to stimulate conversation among scholarly societies to say, for biologists, what is the right way to share data? What are the important aspects of that data that people need to know? How long should that data be kept? And they wanted the scholarly societies to work that out and then to make that standard, and then the NSF would take that standard and sort of make that the requirement. Now that I don't think that's happened terribly well because we're still in the midst of raising awareness as to what could or should be done for data sharing, but hopefully eventually scholars themselves, researchers themselves, through their societies will get together and articulate for our data, these are the things that need to happen for it to really be valuable and really be used.
Thank you very much. We are running short of our time. Unfortunately, in the midst of our discussion, I must say that we have to conclude this panel discussion now. Whether that is within Japan or abroad, we have similar set of challenges with common problems. So handling these challenges is something that we are asked to do going forward. We need to face those problems. So that is the impression that I got from the panel discussion. Sorry that we have to conclude this panel discussion at this time. Please give another round of applause to all the panelists.